Hello and welcome to the second in our series of narrated lectures, The Costuming and Fashion of Ancient Egypt. This again, like the introduction, will be split up into two sections to keep the file size smaller. I'm going to go through this quickly, so hopefully it'll still be legible, even though I'm going to go through it pretty fast. There's not a lot of costuming in ancient Egypt, even though it's a 3,000-year-old empire. So let's get started with the historical context. As I said, it is 3,000 years old, which is a long time. Remember, the Christian era is 2,000 years old. So they still have a millennia on Christianity, and also about 500 years on Greek-Roman Empire. So old empire. It's 5 different periods it's comprised of. The Thinite period, which is just 2 kingdoms along the bank of the Nile, the Upper Nile and the Lower Nile. The Old Kingdom, where we start to see great advances in engineering, start to see some kind of proto-pyramids. Middle Kingdom, anarchy, civil war, then reunification, expansion, great public works, a lot of the City of the Dead, Karnak, Pyramid of Giza. New Kingdom, probably the strongest, the most dominant in the region at that time. The Persian domination, where Persian occupiers assumed the role of pharaoh. And then, technically, the dynasty ended with the conquest by Alexander the Great. Now, it did kind of continue for some time after that in the kingdom known as the Ptolemaic Pharaohs. And that lasted until the Roman Empire. And, of course, the last true pharaoh is Cleopatra, who killed herself along with her lover Mark Antony when they were attacked by the Romans under the person who will become Augustus Caesar. Okay, so socially, pharaoh at the top, living embodiment of a god, deputies and high priests below him, civil servants, scribes, artisans, and of course servants and laborer. And then the lowest rung, of course, were slaves, for them captives. There were a few of these. Now, slaves, they say, built the pyramids, kind of. Without the artisans and craftsmen, it's nothing there. Basically, the slaves did haul blocks, but most of the hard work was, well, that was hard work, obviously, but a lot of the work was done by the craftsmen, engineers, and so forth. Women had no power, but they did run households, nurture children. Marriage was a civil contract, really only. Divorce was easy. You just say, I don't want to be married to you anymore. No data that I have that it was common or it was unusual, but it was certainly easy. There was a rigid hierarchy, but there was room for advancement, particularly for scribes and people in the building trade. Hygiene was very important. The banks of the Nile is hot and humid. Cleanliness was rigorously applied, and nudity not taboo. There was really no thought about it. Lower classes and children often went completely without clothes. It was not unheard of. Total nudity was frowned upon by the upper classes. They should have something on to denote, yes, I am nobility, or I am a higher clerk, But, people going around doing blue-collar jobs. Well, they're not blue-collar because they're naked, but it was not a thing. So there we are. Great importance on magic, symbols and icons revered. The Scarab Beetle. Let me get my little highlighter here. You can see up here. Oh, that didn't work. Yellow's no good. Anyway, highly prized. The Eye of Horus, which symbolized the moon. Also, Horus is the main god, one of the main gods. Cobra was also a symbol. Cobra was a symbol of Lower Egypt, the Lower Nile, the Vulture of the Upper Nile. Also very important, as you will see in some of the headdresses. Okay, what types of fabric would they use? Linen, wool. Here we see a picture of some ancient Egyptian flax. There, no cotton at the time, which is kind of interesting, since now Egypt is one of the leading producers of quality cotton. Linen was prized because it was naturally white. White was a sacred color. They were not dyed because Egyptians did have knowledge of a catalyst agent, something to set the dye, to make it color fast. So you don't want those run-in colors, so you kept them white. They were very sheer. The thinner the better in this climate. And remember, this nudity is not really an issue. So Egyptians at the time could create fine fabrics up to 200 thread count, which is pretty good. Spinning wheels haven't been invented yet, though, so there's an issue. How do you make yarn or thread? Well, you use a handmade drop spindle, shown here. There's your drop spindle. It's held by hand. I have a little video that's coming up. You can link to. You can see. So you make yarn using the drop spindle. You have a simple loom that's 2 notched wooden beams placed a specified distance apart on the ground. You attach the warp threads to them, and then you spin the weft through. Let's see, I got a little, this is interesting. This is a funeral model depicting a textile workshop staffed by labor class women and slaves. So you can see this is very interesting here. If you can look, here's one of those looms I was talking about on the floor. Here's a woman using a drop spindle. These, I think, are also weaving. I'm not sure, or fabricating. You do have some sewing. Linen thread, which is stitched with needle made of copper or bone. Cutting was not done with scissors, not there yet, but a sharpened piece of flint or merely torn. But there were textile operations, you can see. So you did have artisans who could do embroidery, beadwork, pleating. Wool was cheaper than linen, so mostly worn by the lower class. And it is warmer, so, this is really not the climate for wool. But, you make do if you don't want to be entirely nude. Which, again, not a problem. Wool was considered more unclean. It was not allowed in holy sanctuaries. We do have some leather for footwear and headgear, as you will see. Here's a link you can follow. I think you can follow it on this narrated form. If not, I have the other version, which is about a 1-minute 30-second video on how to use a drop spindle. And remember, this is what they use to make yarn. It's a little more labor intensive than your regular spinning wheel, but it's not been invented yet. How about we look at some men's clothing? The shinty. This, you see the arrow pointing, that is a skirt wrapped around the waist. That is the most common men's garment. It was okay, it was knee length, but it started to go up to mid-thigh for later on, and usually the ends are rounded, so they make this sort of diagonal drape, as you can see. It is held by a decorative belt called the spin dot, right? This thing right here, your spin dot. And then simple triangular loincloth, usually made of wool, for your underwears. Sometimes you have this large starped apron worn by the upper middle classes, and then on that, if you're royalty, you will show your royal pendant or decorated loin pendant, as you can see here. Very fancy. Pharaohs had a tiger tail, symbol of their power. In the Middle Kingdom, we get this other royal piece that becomes very characteristic, known as the royal hake, which is a piece of fabric secured at the back of the neck, wound around the body, and kind of looks like a shinty and a cloak. This is the first picture I had. It's not very good. I'm going to show you better ones, but it does show. This shows it very sheer linen. You got a little bit of shinty underneath here, and you have pleating, which is done by laying wet fabric on long groove boards and applying starch. Here's a good example. Here we are. You can see it's kind of tied in the front, wrapped around, and draped. Here's some more royal hakes with the pleating, you can see. So I hope that's clear. Usually one, and usually tied, knotted, tied, twisted around, and made sometimes, you can see here, to look like 2 garments. Well, here in particular. But it's not. It's 1 garment. You can see here's his apron and his loin pendant as well. New Kingdom, longer shinties. Elaborate spin dots and loin pendants, nothing really new, just a variation. Also, we get this kind of shawl, this kind of half royal hake. This is tied in the back. He's just kind of looped the shawl around and tied it in the back. And then a pleated, starched, pleated, sheer linen shinty. Also, just mentioned this is a corselet, not this part here, but the thing underneath is a corselet. Basically a tube top. And then this part, the stripe part that goes across, that's a lecter. This is mostly for war, as you can see there. Sheer pleated linen robes, put this in, okay. And here you see this again, you can kind of see this pleated linen shawl and long scores that makes this long pouch. This was worn by a lot of clerics and scribes because this is like a big old pocket. You can put your stuff in, your papyrus and your tablets, when you're going about doing the daily business. Okay, let's go to women's clothing. The calasiris, sheath dress, calasiris with a K, most common, most characteristic garment for women of all class, from high to low. It is a sheath of linen, seamed on one side, closely fitted and held with one or two straps. It was decorated. I can't go back. You can see let me go on before I get too far ahead of myself here. Most common style was the calasiris to be fitted below the breast like this, with a sort of V-strap coming up. You can kind of see that here on this cape or a pyramid drawing, coming up between the breasts. Again, this is not an issue for the Egyptians. We do have one that covers the cleavage or the breast with a broad strap, you can see. Now, it was natural linen, but it was often decorated or painted with patterns or beadwork. These examples here, this one over here on the left, is based on a painting where the decoration was a net of leather. Here we have some beads on there. So there are all sorts of ways to decorate your calasiris and paint it. It's not really dyeing, because dyeing will run, but it's sort of painting, pigment. Here we see kind of a royal hake for women. Wear the gown over a linen shinty. Also a sheer linen shawl, draped and knotted. Over a full calasiris, we see a kind of sleeved calasiris. I think that's late kingdom. Okay, that's it. That's pretty much. It's going to get more complicated the further we go, but for now, that's pretty much it for men's and women's fashions in the Egyptian. 3,000 years, that's what they have come up with. It works. It's hot, and they have very good air conditioning. Let's talk hairstyles, headdresses. Men shave their heads, would sometimes wear a wig. Women would wear wigs, but they also would keep their hair, and they plaited their hairs into elaborate cornrows, which that is our term, not theirs. If you're a woman of upper class, you can see down at the bottom in B, you could stitch the end of your hair into little gold eyeglets on the ends, which would weight the hair down. Wigs were very popular. Women's wigs looked like cornrow, and then men simpler rolled wigs. Mostly they would use these headdresses. Beards were considered a status symbol. However, most men did not wear beards. But what they did is something like, you can see this is a wooden beard that is pleated or braided, or has leather braided around it. And then it has hooks to attach it behind the ears. A ceremonial beard. Two things to talk about real quick that are unusual. Royal children have the lock of youth, where their entire head is shaved except for this one lock up here, and that is allowed to grow long. And then women of all classes, from upper to lower, would wear cones of perfumed beeswax on the head. Egyptians had used beekeeping, honey, and so I don't know what they did there. Beekeeping, honey, and that sort of thing. Had a strong relationship with bees and honeys. Honeys have been found in pyramids, 3,000 years later, that are still edible. That's still edible. So anyway, perfumed beeswax. The thing is, the cone would melt, suffusing the hair or wig with a pleasing aroma. I think it would be better with a wig because at the end of the day, you're going to have a head full of honeyed hair. It may smell good, but I'm not sure that's the best fashion solution. Anyway, headdresses. Let's talk about a couple that are important, almost exclusively the domain of nobility and royalty. But there is a common type of headgear, very characteristic of the Greek, very easy to make too. I should put in here a slideshow about how to make a claft. Oh, that's what it is, a claft. Both men and women is a rounded piece of fabric, usually wool. This is an actual one. I think this looks like linen to me. Fell into square fold. What it is, you could attach it to the back and would fall into square folds behind the ears, and it's knotted in the back. That is the most simple, basic, and characteristic Egyptian headdress, which will become the nimis, which is the ceremonial headdress for pharaohs. As you can see, it is made usually of linen or wool. Linen, when you have to go into a place, and you can see it is colored, it is painted and striped. And you have a long tail in the back that you would, hang on, a long tail in the back that would have a clasp, but you'd have that front sort of thing, excuse me, that was kind of shaped that way, which is kind of a formal clasp. You can see in this picture too, he's got the beard. You can see it going up and into the knees. Okay, two things here. The Urease and the Vulture. This is a cobra up here called a Urease. So you would usually have some kind of headdress. This is just a simple diadem with a Urease. This is a Vulture headdress. Remember, Vulture is Upper Nile. No fancy name for that. It's just a vulture. And then Queen Nefertiti wore a high brimless head covering, apparently over a shaved head. This is made of leather, shaped leather. Pharaohs wore a number of different helmets. They were made for different occasions. Here we see at the bottom the Shent crown. Trying to sort of quietly pronounce that P, which combine the red crown of Lower Egypt with the white crown of Upper Egypt. And it too had a Urease. So Urease is very common and characteristic of that. New Kingdom pharaohs would wear a blue war crown to symbolize their power. And then this one, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, this is the Hemamet Crown. Kind of sounds like you're trying to get something out of your throat. Hemamet. Excuse me while I Hemamet. You can see very unwieldy on top of a Nemes. Big old unwieldy thing. This is about the best illustration I could find. So not used that much, but when you had a big ceremony, you want to look your best, you put on your Hemamet crown. Okay, I'm going to stop there on this first one, and we will pick it up, accessories and a couple of little things on the second slide. So thank you for your patience.